Special time, 5 a.m. Eastern.
The Weather Channel is brought to you by this cable or satellite provider. You can also get reliable forecasts from the Weather Channel through this radio station or visit weather.com.
We are beginning to take the worst of Hurricane Sandy here on the Jersey Shore. Look at this wave.
We're already seeing significant impacts from the storm, and the worst of it is about to hit.
It's going to be hours to some cases days of severe weather.
We're at a moment now where evacuation is no longer possible, and we're no longer able to come and rescue people.
The worst of the storm is coming in between the 6 and 10 p.m. time period. Sandy continuing to impact the Northeast, and some of you haven't even felt the worst of it yet.
This just in, Sandy no longer a hurricane, but a post-tropical storm, Superstorm Sandy now. Thanks for joining us or staying with us. I'm Chris Warren.
And I'm Crystal Egger, and that really isn't going to change the impacts at this point. We still have a very large, very dangerous, life-threatening storm on our hands set to make landfall within the next hour. Let's go to our hurricane specialist right now, Dr. Greg Postel. And Dr. Postel, this is really a critical period, isn't it, for storm surge and water rise in many areas, including New York City, as we await high tide.
Oh, that's absolutely right, because the winds have been blowing for the most part out of the east all day along New York and the south shore of New England, and what that's done is piled up the water on the west side of Long Island Sound. But what we see now is fairly soon. The center of circulation is very close to the New Jersey coast, and what we're going to see here is a turn in wind direction. Instead of blowing from the east, which was piling water up along the Sound on the west side of the Sound, it's going to start to turn around to the southeast overnight and south, and that is going to pile a lot more water up on the south shore of Long Island and in parts of closer to New York City, in particular Raritan Bay. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to look closely at the circulation here and some of the winds associated. Look at this, wind gust of 59 here at Wallops Island, winds gusting to 48 at Atlantic City. No, and then we have northeast winds, actually east winds, still gusting to 44 in Nantucket, 66-mile-an-hour wind gust in Montauk Point, Long Island. Again, look at these wind directions, though. They are out of the east still, and that will be the case for several hours. Look at the circulation. You can almost see why that might be the case. The winds are flowing around the counterclockwise fashion right in here, and the center somewhere in the vicinity, and if you notice, a lot of the heavy rain is located to the west of the center. Very heavy rainfall amounts and even some significant snows in the higher elevations of West Virginia. But also notice there's some very strong radar echoes in here, some heavy showers moving onshore. Those will likely be associated with damaging wind gusts. You know, all afternoon we've seen wind gusts in the 75 to 85 mile per hour range along the coast of New England, 84 miles per hour all across. We've seen 84 to 90 miles per hour even in parts of Long Island. So very, very strong winds. Now let's zoom in a little bit and show you exactly what the radar looks like in the New York area. Again, we're watching these radar returns because they give you an idea of what the low-level wind direction is. It's not exact. It's coming in at just a slightly different angle, but generally like this. And the more and more Sandy moves that direction, we're going to start to see that south wind return. And now we'll have some significant impacts regarding the storm surge and the water rise associated with that changing wind direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in one of our hurricane specialists and storm surge expert, Michael Lowry, to talk more about what we can expect in terms of the coastal flooding as these winds change direction over the next several hours.
Yeah, right now we're seeing records broken almost everywhere up and down the New Jersey and New York coasts. And you've alluded to it, as today what we had is this kind of easterly flow which has pushed water into Long Island Sound. This is Kings Point, New York. This is on the north side of Long Island. In the last 3 hours, we've had the surge that has risen 3 feet in the last hour. That is really significant, Greg.
Yeah, indeed it is. And that will likely to continue to be the case as Sandy continues to bring in a lot of water from the Atlantic. And furthermore, we're going to see some differences here. As we look at the Battery Park here, the water rise there, this is also significant. What we're seeing here is a water rise that will likely will accelerate because of the changing in the wind direction to the south.
And the water's continue to rise at the Battery. We're above, in fact, we're having trouble keeping up with the graphs here. We're actually above 7 feet, and that's just 7 feet, what we call the storm component. That's just the water rise from Sandy, and that's on top of the tides that they're getting, and the tides are rising. So what we can assure you is that the waters will continue to rise, especially at the Battery in New York City.
Yeah, don't be confused by this right here. This little leveling off here that's been in the last couple of hours, that is going to likely resume its ascent here. It's going to resume the increase in height there because of the change in wind direction that we're expecting very shortly. So with that, we're going to send it back to you guys in the studio.
All right, thank you very much. Our hurricane specialist keeping an eye on what's happening right now. We also have a team of reporters and meteorologists in the field keeping an eye on what's happening right now with this Superstorm Sandy.
Right now we want to go to Eric Fisher. He's live for us in Narragansett, Rhode Island with the very latest. Eric?
Hey, Crystal, good evening to both of you. We had to move since the last time we talked to everybody. Reason for that, the storm surge that has been rolling in has been the main story that we've been talking about since we started this morning in Narragansett. If you look over, and I know it's dark now and we're trying to do our best to throw a little light on it, you see all the water. And the last time we did a report for you, we were over by those shrubs that are in the background. Again, I hope you can maybe make them out. And they were pretty much dry. The water has filled up the parking lot. It's about a foot deep or so, in some spots up to a foot and a half. And that water came in quick. We're talking 15 to 25 minutes, and that water moved in from the street into this parking lot right up to the front of the inn that we've been staying in staged at, which is in the dark, by the way. Pretty much all up and down the shore, the lights are out from here all the way to Point Judith and westward over toward westerly Rhode Island. And actually, right up to the stairs, that's where the water level is. The good news I can pass along right now is that we had that rapid rise. It hasn't changed a lot over the last 30 to 40 minutes. So as we approach high tide, it's in the next hour or so. It looks like perhaps we are just going to level out, maybe a little more rise, and that's going to be it. And I have to say, one of the eeriest things I've ever seen, we've talked so much about the full moon cycle and how that would affect and add a little bit extra to the storm surge. There's been some clearing from time to time. It's back in the clouds right now, but that full moon's been over our shoulder, lighting up some of the floodwaters. And just in the middle of the downtown area, a very eerie feel out here, especially just a couple days away from Halloween. The latest reports that we're getting in, tens of thousands are in the dark. A lot of folks are going to have that same situation tonight because the winds will stay gusty, not as strong as the 80+ mile-per-hour gusts we saw earlier on today, but still enough that we're going to be talking about more outages being added on, and of course the crews can't really get out and get to work the way they normally would. A situation like Irene, where we had 70s and sunshine the next day, won't be the case here, so it might be several days for some folks before those lights come back on. We've also seen some incredible gusts to our north, up on Mount Washington in New Hampshire. They've been gusting well over 130 miles per hour. The record there is 231 miles per hour, and I think that one is going to be safe. We'll keep you updated here from Rhode Island. We'll try to get a little more light on the situation, and hopefully we are done with the surge maxing out. A little more rise. That should be about it. We head west over to the Connecticut coastline into Stonington. That's where Reynolds Wolf has been stationed. He has the latest from the Connecticut shore.
I'm coming from the corner of Omega and Hancock Street right here in Stonington. Just over the last 20-30 minutes, the wind has been unbelievable. This house, hours ago, was in fine shape, but the waves have just been relentless. Just pounding through, ripping away part of the outer wall. Goodness gracious. Part of the foundation of the house being sheared away. Unbelievable. Winds have been out of the north. Power's out all over the peninsula. Not expecting much improvements over the next several hours. My goodness, the wind has just been insane. We haven't seen much of a shift in the wind either. Everything has been from north to south. Not much in terms of rain. It's all coming in just right off the water itself. Again, in sheets. Some streets are flooded. On the other side of the peninsula, some roadways are covered with water. It's coming up on that side too. Trees, huge trees. Some of them look like they've been around for over a century. Knocked down. Branches over many of the roadways.
Wow, Reynolds Wolf, Stonington, Connecticut, along the north shore of Long Island Sound. Now, let me show you the wind. Now, that was obviously recorded by Reynolds just a little while ago, but the storm surge is still coming in, and here's what's going on. Look at the winds here. There's Montauk. So Montauk is on the end of Long Island, and the wind is now out of the east there. So just a little while ago, it was more like this, and that was what Reynolds was talking about. Now it's switched around to the east, and we even have an east wind here at New York. So an east wind, there's Long Island right there. An east wind drives the water into Long Island, and that's what we're seeing at Kings Point, which is on the west end of Long Island, now 12.4 feet above normal. 12.4 feet there above normal. That's over here from that east wind. Now, what hasn't happened yet, if you see these circles here, so what's happening is if the circle is going like that, the wind is kind of across the circle, a little left of the circle. So what's going to happen is as the center moves over farther over here, this wind is going to come more down this way. So that's going to start driving water up toward the southern coast of New England, and it's going to drive water up onto Long Island. So these winds are going to shift. So Montauk, instead of being out of the east and right now gusting to 66, and it's going to become more like that this evening, and we think that that is going to cause, right now, the biggest surge is on the north side of Long Island. We think that's going to move the biggest surge to the south side of Long Island, or at least the surge plus waves on the south side will be bigger. JFK just gusted to 72. We have 82 at Islip, which is right in the middle of Long Island. And here on the north side, with this east wind, 94 miles per hour at a place called Eaton's Neck there. So you notice the way the winds kind of turn around like this. There you see them adjusting as the new reports come in. Now you saw the move. Look at it. Now it's a little more of a southeast, gusting to 69 at Montauk. So now we're starting to get the water moving to the south side of Long Island and against the south shore. So the expectation is that with two things happening at the same time. One, the wind switching to more of a south orientation, from coming in from the more toward the southeast, east-southeast to southeast, and eventually south, that's going to push the water up, unfortunately, against Connecticut and against Rhode Island and against the south side of Long Island. And also, we have this high tide thing happening. So high tide is going to happen in less than 2 hours from now. And so those two things together are going to peak the storm surge here in this area of southern New England. And also, we think, peak the storm surge here in the southern part of Long Island and in New York City as well. So these storm surge numbers, here's that storm surge forecast for the Jersey Shore. And by the way, in that whole discussion, I didn't talk about the Jersey Shore because of the changing dynamics up there in Long Island and in southern New England. But on the Jersey Shore, we have what's left over of the circulation of what was the Hurricane Sandy, and now it's still pushing water in here on the Jersey Shore. In the southern part of the Jersey Shore, that part you see sticking out right there, you see that right there? That's Long Beach Island there, and that's Barnegat Bay, is that big piece of water there, and that was decimated by the 1962 Ash Wednesday storm, it's called today. Back in the day, they called it the Great March Storm, because it just tore up this entire part of the Jersey Shore here, and we'll just have to see when this is all done. But certainly with piling that water in there, those are fragile barrier islands there. So 4.8 feet of storm surge. What is storm surge? Storm surge is if you stand at the high water line, so typical tide comes in, stand at the high water line, how high is it going to be above that? So you can imagine what 8 feet is, a couple feet over above my head. Now let's go a little close in here, and you see here is this was the forecast. Now the forecast was for 6 to 11 feet in Long Island Sound here because of that east wind pushing the water in. And by the way, LaGuardia Airport is over here, so we haven't gotten any reports from because they've shut down the airport. There's significant flooding in this end here. And then look what happens. Long Island Sound feeds here into the East River and on down. I drew that wrong. Feeds into the East River and then down to the southern end of Manhattan down there. And then you also have the Hudson River. So you have both of these waterways coming in, and then the water comes in this way into the Battery. So we expect that water will continue to rise in the Battery. We may see record water heights in the Battery here tonight, and of course we'll check back in on that. Okay, back to you, Chris and Crystal.
All right, Brian, we'll look forward to checking back with you shortly. And a couple of updates to share. We've had some strong winds reported at JFK now, up to 72-mile-per-hour wind gusts, the strongest we've had there with Sandy so far.
And we're still getting in new video here into the Weather Channel showing the impacts of now Superstorm Sandy. And we're looking right now, Point Pleasant Beach in New Jersey, looking at some video of those big waves coming on shore.
And now we take you to Nantucket, and many scenes unfolding just like this throughout the evening hours. Water overwashing some of these seawalls and barriers, inundating communities. And this is happening in Nantucket. You're looking at Nantucket Island there. And again, we've got crews out in these areas. We'll get the latest in just a moment.
And now to North Carolina, Kitty Hawk seeing some of the, at least looks like some of the ocean water getting into areas where it's not supposed to be. You can see some of that foam indicating that that is most likely what's happening, is that you're getting the ocean moving into parts of the Outer Banks there in North Carolina.
Testament to the size of this storm and how far-reaching it is. Now look at this. They are surfing on Lake Michigan in Chicago. Also an impact from Superstorm Sandy as we see those wave heights rise across Lake Michigan.
And we want to take a live look right now at Point Pleasant, New Jersey. And we are taking a look right now at some of that water coming in. Again, Point Pleasant Beach in New Jersey.
All right, we have a crew here. We're going to find out the latest. And this is really a critical period going forward as we anticipate high tide. And the winds are pushing that water on shore in places like New Jersey. Watching New York City closely, we'll go to Jim Cantori in Lower Manhattan. There, we're coming right back as we track Superstorm Sandy. Just about 20 past the hour now, tracking Superstorm Sandy, far-reaching impacts into Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You can see some of the wind damage. Look at these trees, uprooted, large trees falling onto homes. Power is out. By the way, our latest number, over 2 million customers are without power in 11 states from North Carolina up to Maine. And here's why. We anticipated this, the damaging winds bringing down trees, bringing down power lines.
And there have been some very impressive reports of some of the wind gusts coming in from Islip on Long Island. 90-mile-an-hour wind gusts there. JFK gusting to 72 miles an hour. So you see this in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, 48-mile-an-hour wind gusts. It doesn't take it, a 70 or a 80 or 90-mile-an-hour wind gust to bring down trees like this, or at least big portions of trees, and bringing down with it some power lines. It could be days before power is restored to the customers. Again, more than 2 million customers, because crews can't get out there until it's safe to do so. And then the volume, the amount of customers without power is enormous, and for many overwhelming.
And if you have, problems, whether your power is out or you want to report damage or flooding, a lot of people are being asked to use 311 versus 911 to keep 911 free for absolute emergencies. Let's go to Jay Gray right now. He's in Cape May, New Jersey, where the water has been rising all day. What's the situation there tonight, Jay?
Hey there, Crystal, Chris, and also growing here is the wind. We're getting a pretty good gust right now. The rain continues to fall, and that surf you talked about, it's been growing here as well. It's beginning to push water into places it frankly hasn't been before here in Cape May, and we're really just beginning to see what will be the most intense effects from this storm. Sandy making its way into the shoreline here, so they've braced for everything. For the last couple of days, people have been boarding up, putting sandbags in place. Now all of that preparation is going to be tested as this storm unleashes its power.
Jay, are you aware of any curfew there? I mean, is it like a ghost town? I'm hoping most people in this area have evacuated.
Yeah, and Crystal, I think they have. That's the good news. A lot of people have decided to go to higher ground or to shelters just outside of the strike zone here. There is a curfew in place right now. No one is to be on the streets. The streets have been closed down for hours here, and we haven't seen a lot of people wandering around, so that's the good news. They're going to continue to keep that curfew in place, according to local authorities, until the conditions ease, and it looks like right now that may be quite some time. So what we've got right now is the strongest effects we've seen to this point. They're coming in waves, as you usually experience as the beginning of the storm moving through. It's going to intensify, as you guys have been talking about, and then, Crystal, we're going to see just how much water this area can withstand. High tide here scheduled for 9/12, so it'll be interesting to see how Sandy plays in with that.
Jay, you said you have not seen a lot of people around, and of course that's good news, but if you have spoken to people or if they've talked to you, what are they saying about this superstorm?
Well, Chris, a lot of people taking it very seriously. You always talk to some who say, I've been through other storms, it's going to be okay, and I'm going to ride this out. And there are those here. Don't let me lead you to believe there aren't people riding the storm out here in Cape May. But for the most part, a lot of people have either gone to stay with friends or moved on to higher ground. They're going to wait and watch and see exactly what Sandy does.
All right, Jay Gray, live in Cape May, New Jersey. Thank you, Jay. And you get the sense of how chilly the air is, I think, just from his delivery there. And that's something else we're going to be dealing with, as millions will be without power now, trying to keep warm in their homes.
That's right. The wind going to be an issue, the storm surge, but also the very heavy rain and some of the very significant rainfall totals we're expecting to see and already have seen. We want to get the very latest on that flooding threat right now with our severe weather expert, Dr. Greg Forbes. Dr. Forbes.
Yeah, Chris, Virginia Beach, Virginia has already seen 9 inches, a little over 9 inches from this. Places farther north in the mid-Atlantic will probably see up to a foot of rain and flooding into Tuesday and Wednesday as the rivers flood from the runoff from all of this rain. Right now, Sandy has become post-tropical. It now has a bigger circulation center. You can almost see that as a big donut here with a hole right about where the low is, about ready to come on shore in southern parts of New Jersey. Very, very fast winds now, as we've been predicting, unfortunately, on the northeast flanks of that. On the right side, over Long Island, 94-mile-per-hour gusts, Eaton's Neck, 90 at Islip. You're going to have extensive tree and power line damage there. You get down to this side, the winds are coming more in from the west. You can see the counterclockwise rotation and all that yellows and oranges, heavy rain that is on the northwest through west sides of Sandy, and Sandy's going to move up into central Pennsylvania, so there's going to be a lot of rain continuing in these areas. There are already flash flood and flood warnings, mostly for river flooding in these bright shaded green areas, anywhere from near Washington to Baltimore up into south central and southeast parts of Pennsylvania. That is only going to get worse. Earlier today, Sandy's tropical circulation was pretty well defined. It by now has gotten absorbed into this much bigger storm system, and hard to find the tropical center in any location. But what you can see here in this water vapor imagery is a big, huge circulation all the way from the Great Lakes up across all of New England, with some dry air pushing in. And actually the most tropical air is over here. It may come into New England overnight tonight and tomorrow. There give a little bit of a tornado chance. But the big threats, storm surge that is ongoing, severe winds that are ongoing, and through Wednesday we're going to have 5 to 10 inches of additional rain. Some places a foot more rain. It includes not very far west of Philadelphia into Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Baltimore, Washington. That will lead to flooding. Some of the locations and forecasts where the major flooding will occur. Here you see Washington, so just to the northwest around Silver Springs. There's Baltimore, there's Frederick, Maryland, Hagerstown. All of these purple locations forecasted major river flooding. That means buildings, homes will be inundated. Some reds here. Moderate flooding could also be flooded, and that flooding situation will extend also up into Pennsylvania. Could be some minor flooding up into parts of New England, where we'll have more localized rain bands, sometimes embedded with thunderstorms pushing against the south and east sides of those New England mountains. So, Chris, Crystal, the effects of Sandy and the bigger system that's absorbed it yet for days to come.
All right, thanks, Dr. Forbes. That's why we call it a superstorm. And look at some of the impacts from that water that Dr. Forbes was just talking about.
And good evening, everyone, from Battery Park City, where, as you can see now, the Hudson River has now decided it wants to overtake Battery Park, and that's what's happening. This is the water rise associated with the tide. We know that the surge level is already at 7 feet. We expect this to keep coming up, and we are going to keep moving back. We'll stay here as long as we can for you, but the water is coming in. We've got power outages already on the other side in Jersey City. Much more to come tonight as we continue to cover Sandy. It's far from over here in the big city. All right, guys, stick around. We got much more to come, as I mentioned.
Jim Cantore, if you can still hear me, the water is continuing to rise there. We've got about another foot to go until high tide of water, which would surpass the 1821 hurricane that put the water up to Canal Street. Now, the waterfront is totally different now than it was in 1821, so you can't, it's a little bit of apples and oranges there. But our projection here is that this will be an all-time record for water at the Battery in the lower end of Manhattan. And so we are very, very concerned now for the electrical system and for the subways and the other issues, not to mention the people that might not have evacuated there in at least Zone A in New York City. So this is an amazing storm surge. Storm surge is just an unbelievable thing when it comes in. Here are the highest storm surge readings, and then let me show them to you individually. So Kings Point, this is up near LaGuardia Airport on Long Island Sound. These are numbers above normal. So this was at 7:15, so 16 minutes ago. The 12.7 feet above normal, where the water should be. Bridgeport, Connecticut, 9.3 feet. New Haven, 8.6. And Sandy Hook, New Jersey, 7.7 feet is approaching the all-time record for the readings that they've been taking readings at Sandy Hook for a long, long time. Now, let's look at the Battery particularly. And here what you saw is the water rising, then it leveled off a little bit, and now it's rising again. And this is just the storm surge. This is not related to the tide. So the tide is on top of this, and the tide has another foot to go. So this is the reason this is happening. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll show you why this is happening in just a second, but I have a couple other things I want to show you first. Just to see the expanse of the tide here. Last report we had at Atlantic City was 4.7 feet above normal there, and we know about people that are trapped on the Barrier Island because of that rising tide. And you see on up into New England, we have 6.5 feet here at New London, 4.5 feet at Woods Hole, and the water being driven into Boston Harbor. Even there, it's high. Okay, so let's talk about the numbers here. And here you see the last report from the National Hurricane Center. We're calling this Superstorm Sandy now. Hurricane Sandy is no more. It's been absorbed into this big nor'easter type storm here that we've been talking about, the dual character. Now it's a single character of this superstorm, the super nor'easter type storm with 85-mile-an-hour winds and this pressure 946 and west-northwest at 28. All right, Jim Cantore is back up with us here. Jim, so you heard the report there where we've got another foot to go of tide, and I think a little more of storm surge as well. So I see the water's coming over the seawall there. You just about to head out? What's going on with you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think where our trucks are right now, we're probably about 2 feet up, 1.5 feet. So that's comforting that you tell me we only have a foot, and I hope that's pretty much where we're at. But, Brian, I'm going to walk back here all the way to the seawall, and I don't know how much you can see of this, but, you know, we've got about 8 inches now on top of the seawall. It's completely covered the seawall. It's also coming over the sidewalk itself onto the grassy area and through here. And, you know, it's not just here. Out in Battery Circle, the water is already in Battery Circle there, and so you've got water on the roads now. And you're right, it'll be up to Con Ed to say, look, we're going to have to shut down some of the power here in Lower Manhattan, because if we start getting water into those subways, obviously, and those electrical lines, we are in big trouble. But look at this, the wave action just rolling here right across the seawall and up onto the grass. This, at this point, is not as high as what we had with Irene. I can tell you that. And if we only go up another foot, we're still not going to be as high. So that's actually great news. I hope it's only a foot. Jim, but I'm telling you, every time we, come to you, it continues to rise. It continues to come up.
That's right, Jim.
Go ahead,
the 1 foot additional is just to do with the incoming tide. Nothing to do with the storm surge. Right. And what we think is happening right now is you had that east wind, that prolonged east wind, driving the water into Long Island Sound and down the East River, kind of pushing back on this water. Well, now the winds are veering around to a east-southeast and eventually southeast. That's going to push the ocean up toward New York Harbor. So we think that the storm surge is actually going to rise along with with the tide. So the projection is that it will be more than a foot more.
Okay, so how much more surge do you think we're going to see?
Well, that's a bit of an open question, because good news is that the overall storm offshore doesn't have as strong winds, but it would be more than a foot is my point. And we're getting up into record territory here, where the projection is that the total will be above 1821, above Hurricane Donna, and well above Hurricane Irene when this is all done. So, this looks significant.
All right, well, here's the deal. If that's the case, if we're going to get a foot of tide and another foot of surge, that's 2 feet, we cannot stay here. We're going to have to break down. But you can certainly see, even since we started talking, Brian, I see it, we've got about 10 inches. Yeah, now we've got about 10 inches of water here, and it just continues to go. There's no retreating back. It's pretty much this sidewalk area and is now onto the grass. So it is definitely rising pretty quickly, actually. And you're right, Brian, the change in the wind has come in now from the east. And what we've seen across the way in Jersey City, especially over the last half hour, are power flashes. You'll notice it's very, there's Jersey City all lit up, the main area. But look at how dark it is in many of these areas, pretty much all the way out to the statue. A lot of power flashes have been going on there. And I don't know if that's from the wind that's picked up. We had a 90-mile-an-hour gusted ice slip. Did that whole wind area kind of travel this way and gust over in Jersey City? Is it a shift in the wind direction, or is it water that is getting into Jersey City as well from this now rising tide? Either way, they're losing power over there, and we're getting water rise here in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah, and what happens too, Jim, as you know, when the wind blows and blows and blows, it finally weakens limbs. Things finally give way after it blows for a while. So that's part of it. Jim, up at Kings Point, up by LaGuardia Airport on Long Island Sound, the water came up 3 feet in 1 hour. 3 feet in 1 hour. So when the wind sets up just right.
That's important.
Yes. So when it sets up just right, so that that ocean is funneled right toward you, it can react really quickly. So just be very aware of that, and that wind is coming around more southeasterly. Can you tell where you are now? Well, what direction the wind is? Are you able to orient yourself? I know with the buildings down there, it's hard.
All right, so let's get orientation here. North, east, west. I think I'm still protected enough. I mean, Brian, I just had a gust in my face. So that would be east. So, yeah, you know what? We may have seen some kind of an easterly wind component of some sort. But you know what? I just couldn't answer that because of the buildings. I mean, I'm just not getting enough wind to tell you any persistent wind direction here. If I was up 10 stories, I may be able to answer that question. But down here, it's just not happening. But here's the deal. If we're going to talk about a 3-foot rise from where we are right now, I don't have the room here where I am in my crew.
All right,
so we'll probably have to break this down.
Jim, 7.3 feet was the water rise at 7 o'clock, 8.0, so 0.7 feet in the half hour is the rate of rise in the water from the surge right now. That's nothing to do with the tide.
Just from the surge.
Just from the surge. So it's still rising in both sides. The surge is coming in and the tide is coming in. And Jim, we're looking at the observations out Montauk and the observations around. As a matter of fact, could you get me a new observation from Newark Airport? And let's just see what direction the wind has switched.
And Brian, you're getting that. Now we're starting to get the water lapping underneath the benches. So now we're just approaching the Irene storm tide at this point. So we're just getting there toward where Irene was in terms of the tide. Because I do remember the bottom of these benches were underwater. So, if we still have, like you said, 2-3 feet to go, I'm going to run out of room here with our trucks and in my crew as well.
Yeah, at Newark Airport, the wind is still northeast, Jim. So this wind has got a ways to turn yet, right? It's going to come around, and when it gets down to a more southeastward orientation later on this evening. So we're going to see. We're going to have a combination of effects here. Because farther east, like out on Long Island, out of Montauk, it's got a southern component to it, right? So the water is being pushed against the south side of Long Island and then deflected toward you there, as well as coming in Long Island Sound and coming down the East River towards you from the north.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we're going to stay here. I'm looking at power flashes going on all over the place down to my south now, too. So You know, I think the water's getting in, Brian. I really do. I think it's starting to invade areas, and you know, like you said, this little change in the wind direction may be enough to just cause some of the trees that weren't exposed earlier with the wind out of the northeast to be exposed. So we're going to probably pack it up and get out of here just to be safe.
We've had these stunning gusts, Jim, up on, I don't know if you heard, on Long Island Sound, 94-mile-an-hour gusts.
90.
94 on
94?
94 on Long Island Sound. 90 at Islip Airport, which of course is in the middle of Long Island. So we're just very fearful for significant damage. Maybe tremendous damage caused by those kind of winds taking trees down. And let's put Times Square back up there. I mean, it is an eerie sight to look at Times Square, having lived there and never seen it. I don't think. Hurricane Irene was the last time we had a shot of Times Square. The power is obviously still on. Jim, in the city, do you see any sign of a power issue there yet, or are things still okay there?
You know, I do not see any change in the power here, but, you know, quite honestly, Brian, all these buildings are evacuated.
Yeah.
Where I'm looking at here in Lower Manhattan, so I can't tell if that's just people that have turned off their electricity. I mean, there's a few lights on in some of the higher floors, but all in all, you know, it's pretty dark everywhere. The rain's starting to pick up now, and I told you earlier, guys, that we're starting to see the water kind of lap toward the bottom of these benches here, and that's where it was with Irene. So we're already about there in terms of the tide and the surge, and at least for the moment, we don't seem to be getting any quick rises. I mean, for a moment there, we've got a nice little rise in the water, and that's at least right now is settled down. But again, given the facts that you're telling me, we could go 2 to even 3 feet up from where we are here, and that's total water rise, regardless of surge and tide combination. We're probably going to have to pull back here.
Okay, we have confirmation now, Jim. Con Ed has begun shutting off the power in Lower Manhattan. So the water has risen to the point that they're concerned that it's going to get in the switches there. So there's our Bruise system. Con Ed shutting off the power, has begun shutting off the power in Lower Manhattan. Water level at the Battery reached 11.87 feet, surpassing the all-time record of 11.2 from 1821. And then there's this whole issue with this crane drama on West 57th Street between 6th and 7th Avenue that they're going to try and figure out what to do with because they still can have these spectacular gusts up at that level. And, of course, you know about the bridges and tunnels being closed. Jim, in the time that we have been here looking at you, we can see the water up to your knees there, and it was not that high when you started out just a few minutes ago.
No, and that's what we're talking about. This is about where this Irene level was on the bottom of these benches. This is exactly what I dealt with, and we already know that the surge is higher. We've already determined that. So we're not at high tide yet. We're not seeing that wind change here like you talked about yet, Brian, which could force even more water up here. So, you know, again, I agree with that. I don't think we're done. I don't think we're done with this water rise at all.
Yeah, we've got a northeast wind there now, Jim. All right, Jim, listen, you stay safe. Figure out... we want to come back to you and figure out what's going on there because you're our eyes and ears on this thing.
All right.
So do the best you can. If you have to, try and call in, okay?
I will. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. All right. All right. So that's the story there. The water we think is going to continue to rise in Lower Manhattan. Con Ed beginning to shut off the power. The reason they do that is because if they get the salt water into the switches there that they control where the electricity flows, then they'll arc, and they have all kinds of problems. It'll take much longer to recover from, although if they do get salt water in there, it's a massive problem. And if they get salt water into those switches, with what's happening is the flow is beginning to come around here. Even though the flow in New York City, the wind in New York City is in New Jersey is still from the northwest. Okay, water level at the Battery up 1 foot in the last 30 minutes. Actually, our calculations were a little bit under a foot, but that'll give you an idea of how fast the water's coming up. It's got about another foot or less to go just because of the tide, not related to the storm surge. So just the tide, normal tide coming in, going to take it up nearly another foot, and we still think the storm surge, as the wind switches around to a more southeasterly direction will push the more water up into New York Harbor, unfortunately. So it just looks like, Chris and Crystal, that the things we have talked about here and our fear for the rising water to do with this massive nor'easter type storm now, formerly hurricane, formerly dual storm, now single storm, is coming to pass, actually maybe even exceeding our fears as we talked about it here for the last few days. Back to you.
Under hurricane specialist, senior hurricane specialist Brian Norcross, thank you very much. And we're seeing the impacts still throughout the day. We've been watching it right now. We're seeing the power outages is going to be a huge deal here. Total customers now without power, more than 3 million, and this storm is far from over.
And we sure hope that everybody planned for those power outages. You have your supplies in order. A couple of reminders to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. You want to use a generator.
The Weather Channel.
Welcome back to our non-stop coverage of Superstorm Sandy. This is a look at what some of the strong storms from this storm has done. A partial collapse of a crane here in Manhattan. Look at that.
At the time of this initial report, we understood there were no injuries, but streets were cleared as a precaution. And, you know, the winds are still incredibly strong in this area, still a real concern, not only with the wind, but then we get into other parts of Manhattan, lower Manhattan, specifically around Battery Park City. And we are watching water rise rapidly. Jim Cantori's out there live. We'll have the latest in just a moment.
Also, we're going to have the very latest on this partial crane collapse Actually, we do have that right now. We want to go to NBC's Rahima Ellis, who's live there with the very latest on this partial crane collapse. Thank you very much for joining us, Rahima. What can you tell us?
What I can tell you is just in the last few minutes, we've started to see something that's very frightening, and that is the winds picked up, and so did this crane. It started swaying in the wind. One of the reasons that they have cordoned off this area is because authorities were fearful that that could happen. So they set up what they've called a collapse zone. No cars, no pedestrians. They've evacuated the apartment buildings, the commercial buildings, even the Park and Meridian Hotel. The guests have been moved to other hotels as a precaution to try to keep people in this area safe. They also had the specialists going up into this construction site of this $1.5 billion luxury high-rise building that's going up in Midtown Manhattan. They've got to go up, we're told, some 74 flights of stairs in order to see if there's anything they can do. But no one is betting that they can secure this thing under these conditions because the winds have been blowing so fiercely.
That's NBC's Rahima Ellis. Thank you very much for that report. And, of course, we're going to keep you posted on the very latest with that, saying that part of the area has been cleared out because they're afraid that we could see more of a collapse.
And guests, moved from that area, staying in that high-rise building as a safety precaution. What we want to do right now is go right back to our senior hurricane specialist, Brian Norcross, for the latest on Superstorm Sandy, and a critical time, Brian, as we watch that water rise in many areas, including Battery Park City.
Yeah, we have this wind direction change, so that's going to take some of the pressure off of Long Island Sound, but not all of it, because we've had this tremendous water move into Long Island Sound. That's on the north side of New York City, so that's pushing the water down the East River. Now it's going to switch around, and we get the water pushing on the south side of the city, and those two waterways actually meet there down at Battery Park City in the lower end of Manhattan. So how all this is exactly going to add up and come together kind of remains to be seen. So we have a report that the first fatality of Sandy has been reported in Maryland. A person was killed in a car crash in Montgomery County, Maryland. Now, some other reports in 75-mile-an-hour winds for the first hurricane-force winds in the city officially reported at JFK, although 100-mile-per-hour gust reported by the New York governor's office on the Triborough Bridge. That's the RFK Triborough Bridge that goes from LaGuardia into Manhattan. 100-mile-an-hour winds. They measure the winds on the bridge because the bridge is up over the river, obviously, so it's well elevated, so it's not like you would get at the surface. But they care about that because they don't allow any traffic on the bridge, so they've closed that bridge. That was the only bridge open between Queens and Manhattan, was that Triborough Bridge, but now that is closed. we have the water at Sandy Hook, New Jersey. Now, Sandy Hook is at the very top of New Jersey, outside of New York Harbor, 2.3 feet now above the record. So it's not 2.3 feet above normal, it's 2.3 feet above the record. And as we said before, Con Edison is turning off the power in lower Manhattan. They're in that process of turning it off to protect the underground electrical system. Now reports coming in, reports of some cars underwater at Avenue C and 14th Street. That's in the East Village, so that's along the East River. So in just a minute, let me get a graphic up and we'll talk about that. But let's go over this water situation in and around New York. And this is what we were fearful of, is the East River flooding. And so this flooding there in the East Village is from that. Okay, so here's the water rise right now, 7.7 feet at the Battery. And that is water above normal. And then the tide is on top of that. And we have about another hour, almost exactly another hour to high tide. So somewhere between a half a foot and a foot more tide to go, plus more push, unfortunately, from the storm. So we've got between 1 and 2 or 3 feet of water yet to rise there. Look at these incredible numbers. This is water rise above normal. 8 feet at the Battery, 12.3 feet at Kings Point there. LaGuardia Airport is over here. Sandy Hook, there's Sandy Hook at well above the all-time record for there. So this is just more and more to come. Here are the highest of any locations above normal. There you see Kings Point on Kings Point there on Long Island Sound, Bridgeport, Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, and Sandy Hook, New Jersey. On the left side there, that is our live look at Battery Park City as the water now coming in over the seawall and pushing farther up. What we're waiting for are two things there to see just how high it gets, and that is this tide coming in, just the plain old high tide rising up another something between 6 inches and a foot. And then we also have the shifting wind direction. The wind at Newark Airport, which is kind of across the Hudson River there from Battery Park City, is still got a northerly kind of component, so it's still pushing the water out. So when that wind turns around, which it will this evening, and becomes more of a southerly wind, then that is going to begin to enhance this storm surge. So hopefully that doesn't happen the next hour with a high tide, but we just can't be sure. This is we've got a long way to go here to see how exactly high that water goes. All right, Chris and Crystal, back to you.
All right, thank you, Brian. And updates are coming in by the minute. The Superstorm Sandy still producing dangerous storm surge, damaging winds, and heavy rain.
And remember, you can track it with us. Superstorm Sandy here on the Weather Channel and on weather.com. And we are
Hurricane Sandy here on the Jersey Shore. Look at this wave.
We're already seeing significant impacts from the storm, and the worst of it is about to hit.
It's going to be hours to some cases days of severe weather.
We're at a moment now where evacuation is no longer possible, and we're no longer able to come and rescue people.
The worst of the storm is coming in between the 6 and 10 p.m. time period. Sandy continuing to impact the Northeast, and some of you haven't even felt the worst of it yet.
That's right, tracking Superstorm Sandy moments away from landfall, a very large, dangerous storm tonight. Good evening, everyone. I'm Crystal Ager.
And I'm meteorologist Chris Warren. This is a situation where the storm is not going to just come right on shore and then move on. This is an event that has been going on for hours, and we still have hours and hours left of this. And already, we're in it now, and we have hours left. Already, more than 3 million customers without power.
That's in 11 states from North Carolina all the way up to Maine. So just a testament of the size of this storm, and it's going to be a long time until those dangerous, damaging winds start to subside. And we're right in a period where we're expecting high tide within the next hour. Places like coastal Connecticut, across Long Island, even up into Rhode Island, and the Outer Banks there of the southern New England. So New York City seeing water rise at Battery Park City right now. This is a time where we're going to see the water rise the highest as far as the storm surge goes. We've already heard that Con Ed has decided to pull the power to lower Manhattan. Manhattan. As a precautionary measure, they have shut off the electricity there as the water continues to stream into some of those low-lying areas.
And we're just now checking our breaking weather alert system. It says a man was killed on 166th Street in New York City, and the victim reportedly found trapped underneath a tree that fell on his home. So we're continuing to get these reports in from New York City, and some of them also flooding. And we want to go right now to Storm Tracker Jim Cantore, who is live right now in Battery Park there in Lower Manhattan. Hello to you, Jim.
Yeah, hey, Chris and Crystal. You know, our situation here certainly has deteriorated rapidly in the last 45 minutes because the water from the high tide is coming up. I'm going to take you back here, and we've had, you know, all the crews that we're out here with have just been constantly retreating across this grass, and it goes up gradual. We got 2 feet to play with here, but let me just show you as I walk back. This would still be grass. This would still be grass here, and then eventually you drop down, if you will, on what is the concrete area of the actual boardwalk area here. Now, as I walk all the way back to the seawall, you can see how high the water is. I mean, it's up to my knees. It's up to my knees right here, and it is right now as high, if not higher, than it was with Irene, and we're not at high tide yet, okay? And we may not have maximized the potential of the surge and obviously the tidal rise, which is coming in with this. The other thing, guys, look at this. Jersey City, got the lights on. Part of it, though, completely in the dark. Can't see much over towards Staten Island as well. Brooklyn, I've also seen a ton of power flashes down that way. You mentioned here Con Ed shutting down the power here in Lower Manhattan. That's not surprising at all. And I think what I'm seeing now are auxiliary and emergency lights in some of these buildings because it is completely dark down toward Wall Street. And also down toward Battery Circle, we understand there's actually water starting to come up there. But this is absolutely an incredible sight. I mean, I am standing right here at Battery Park looking at water sloshing up across the sidewalk as far as the eye can see, both up and down and through here. And there were people out here today walking around and really enjoying themselves because it wasn't bad. Don't think that what I'm dealing with here is a good representation of the wind. It absolutely is not. We have been protected all along. We're kind of encased down here, and until the winds shift full board across the water, we're not going to feel the worst of the wind, and that simply hasn't happened yet. But these power flashes are either one of two things. They are... What's that? Go ahead, Brian. Go ahead.
I just want to let you know the National Hurricane Center has called landfall on the hurricane, or what's left of the hurricane. It's not really a hurricane anymore, but down 5 miles below Atlantic City for the technical landfall of the center. So go ahead and continue. I just want to let you know that just came in. That doesn't affect what's going on with you, because it's not the hurricane that's driving this water in here. It's the nor'easter part of Sandy that's driving the water into Lower Manhattan.
Well, and we should make a point, too. You get surge with nor'easters.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
in this case,
we
you'll
still
get more
got that.
surge, actually.
Right, because of the winds are going to change direction. Brian, I've definitely noticed a wind change. Winds now have come in out of the almost this kind of an easterly or southerly direction here coming up this way. They may be being channeled a little bit, but there are spots that I can walk where I don't feel much wind at all. You can almost see the rain coming straight down. But again, in the last 45 minutes here, obviously some big changes have gone on. I'm up about a foot from where the edge of that water is now, and basically what I'm going to do is pretty much use this area where I'm standing right now as a judgment call. Once the water gets to here, that's it, because we have about 6 to 8 inches to play with here down at the Battery, and then we got to call it. But I'm going to try and ride this out as long as I can. I mean, I think the saving grace is don't think this is a typical storm surge situation. Trust me on that. I was in Katrina, and I watched the water come up 20 feet in about 10 minutes. All right, so this is far from how you can get a typical storm surge situation. This is kind of a gradual rise in what we're seeing here as the tide comes in and the surge comes in, and nothing is rising that quickly, at least at this point.
Well, you know, Jim,
hopefully, and it won't.
You know why? Because you have such a complicated coastline here, and Mike Lowry knows more about this than I do, but it's very complicated. So you have water coming from the north, you have water coming from the south, and so you have all these factors coming together. In Katrina, you had that push on shore, right, and into Lake Pontchartrain. It was somewhat simpler. Here, we have some news for you, Jim. First of all, what's the word? On the rise. This is a really interesting thing. We're trying to sort it out, but the record at the Battery.
I know what you're reporting down there at the Battery, Jim, but if you look at the observations, the surge right now is twice as high as it was during Irene. This is a significant storm surge event for New York City, something that we haven't really seen in the city's history.
So, we're trying to
How much tide do we have left?
We don't have much left.
How much tide do we have left?
We don't have much tide left, but the water, the storm surge, is still continuing to rise down there, Jim.
So we're trying to rectify what you're seeing there with what the tide gauge is showing, because obviously you're not seeing 4 more feet of water than in Irene. Right now, and we're not going to get that much more in the tide, although we do. The storm surge, as Mike was saying, is still going to come in. Okay, what else? What else do you have?
Yeah, so we have parts of we've seen pictures for East Village. There are other parts we're reporting at the Battery, parts of East Village that are underwater.
So I have a Google map on that. Jim, you haven't seen these pictures perhaps, but here's the story. So here's Manhattan for folks watching at home, and here's the East River here, and it bends right there. See that bend in the East River, and the water's coming down there. I guess, what's the reading up at Kings Point up at the north end?
So this is a big change in the wind. This is the strongest wind we've had all day. This is a huge change. The wind is coming right across the water now, so it's coming from the Statue of Liberty. Yeah, certainly, you know, in an east, maybe southeasterly direction. Jim, it's coming. It's definitely coming our way.
This makes sense. The water levels actually come down a little bit, you know, further north on the Kings Point area. But you know, the winds are shifting is what's happening. So the water might be going down north end of Long Island, but there are rising in lower Manhattan right now.
Right. So what's happened, Jim, in the East Village up on 14th Street, at the east end of 14th Street, is that water coming down the East River is then coming over the land. So this is that A evacuation zone, and that's a fairly low part of Manhattan there, where there's a bend in the river. So the river is kind of taking over that part of Manhattan, and we're seeing cars up to their roofs there on the east side of Manhattan, and then it comes around, and Jim is over here in Battery Park City on the lower end of Manhattan there.
Some of the buoy observations last hour.
Well, Brian, I'm gonna just tell you this right now. What I've seen that you guys can't see, you know, I've showed you the water and the water rise here, which is again steadily and gradually come up. But we have had power flashes. I mean, I look down toward Brooklyn, over towards Staten Island. It almost is completely dark out there. This part of Jersey City is completely dark now. Of course, the main city part is a lot lighter. The lights are on there, but we have seen a lot of many power outages here over the last hour. A lot of flashes going on as these transformers are obviously being overwhelmed. So whether that's water, that's wind, or a combination, which I probably think it is, with this, especially with this change in wind direction, that's been one of the, if not the biggest note, if we want to make here over the last hour. The water again continues to come up. Notice here, guys, even since we started talking, it's probably come up another 4 inches. Maybe about 3 inches from where it is. You can see the waves that were on the Hudson today continuing to rise here. So again, we continue to see water rise, and we probably will, as you mentioned, for the next hour. Guys?
Jim Cantore, let's interrupt you just 1 second, because we have Joseph Bruno, who from the Office of Emergency Management in the City of New York, on the phone with us. Mr. Bruno, okay, well, what's the condition? What's the situation in New York City now? Mr. Bruno? Joseph Bruno, can you hear me? Joseph Bruno from...
Has dropped down a bit.
Hi, Mr. Bruno, can you hear us on the Weather Channel? Mr. Bruno?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Mr. Bruno, can you hear us? Mr. Bruno, could you tell us? Hello. Could you tell us what's the situation in the city of New York? I think we're having a connection problem with Joseph Bruno. All right, Jim, come on back in, and then let's, because we want to find out. They have the overview there. They have that incredible operations center.
Jim, something worth pointing out here, I was looking at some of the buoy observations, 20 to 30-foot waves just south of New York Harbor. So even though that we might be seeing high tide, the surge continues to rise. Even when the tide falls, the water may not fall. It will remain elevated, I'm sure, for at least the next few hours.
So 20 to 30-foot waves offshore, well offshore, but remember the forecast was for 10 to 20-foot waves ashore of the South Shore of Long Island, in the Fire Island area, and over toward Ocean Beach, and down across Fire Island, and especially the west and central parts of Fire Island. So, and maybe even as far over to the Hamptons have very high waves. So that's all part of this equation. As the wind comes around, Jim, we'd expect all that to increase there on the South Shore of Long Island.
Guys, we should try and get that gentleman on the phone. I'd like to hear what he has to say, you know, if we can reestablish
All right,
him.
we have him. I think we have him here. hang on just 1 second, Jim. Joseph
okay,
Bruno.
Yeah, take this.
The Office of Emergency Management in New York. Are you with us, Mr. Bruno?
Yes, I am.
Can you tell us the situation in New York City now?
Yeah, well, we're about 30 minutes, 35 minutes from our peak surge and our high tide. So we are also experiencing the high winds, which now are in the area of 60 to 70 miles an hour. They were predicted to be a bit higher, but that's good news that they've come down a bit.
Yeah.
We got a lot of flooding here. There's certainly overtopping a number of the seawalls. We have a mandatory evacuation going on, as you know. People are listening to our advice, and very few people are on the road.
Mr. Bruno, we have heard that Con Ed is turning off some of the power in lower Manhattan. As a matter of fact, we're looking at Times Square, and we're seeing the lights go off in Times Square as we are looking at it live here, unless they're just blinking. But I think I've seen a darkening up 7th Avenue. I think we're looking up 7th Avenue from Times Square there. Do you have any other reports of power outages or turning off the power in the city so far?
We have two networks that have gone down in lower Manhattan, the Fulton Network and the Bowling Green Network. Those are both downtown. They would not affect the Empire State Building.
All right, so we'll try and determine exactly what we're seeing. It may just be the animation there in Times Square. How about the water rising and the concern for the subway system? Do you have reports yet from the MTA on what they might be experiencing?
Well, the MTA shut down effective yesterday at 7 o'clock. For the trains, at 9 o'clock for buses. And what they did is they took all of their equipment and have it on high ground, which is exactly what they should do. This way, once the storm goes through, flooding subsides, that they'll be able to open up the system relatively easily. So they're on hold mode now. They're here with us in the Emergency Operations Center. We're fully activated, and we'll work with them as soon as they're ready to reopen.
So the concern expressed before the storm was that salt water, because the flooding is a salt or brackish water, would get, if it went in and down into the subway, that would cause a problem and a significant delay in opening the subway. Have you heard anything like that, or is there is any of that going on now? Is that a concern that's been expressed to you?
No, this is it. The reason for shutting off the subway system and shutting it down and depowering it is so that if salt water came in, it would not hit a live system and therefore really destroy the equipment. What we've done now is that we have all the equipment in good position. The system is depowered, so that if water comes in, it has to be cleaned, but it's a much shorter program than doing anything else. The system will come up much more quickly, and we think that's the right way to go. Yeah,
sounds like the right way to go. Now, we've seen fantastic water rise on Long Island Sound and Kings Point up there on the north side of Queens. Do you have any reports of flooding there? Any effects from that Long Island Sound high water?
Well, we know that was going to be one of the highest areas of inundation. When the storm came in, it was pretty clear from all the predictions of the National Weather Service that the Long Island Sound area would get hit more than the South Shore or the Atlantic side, and that has happened. And we do see some overtopping. We see some flooding there. I have not had any particular reports. Edgewater Park is probably one of the areas, is likely one of the areas getting it. I think you mentioned Kings Point as the other. We see about potentially 15 foot of including tide and surge in that area. That's a huge height of water. We also see a very high inundation in the Battery, which has gone up around 11 feet. But the good news is, on the other side of this storm, we're going to see a decrease relatively quickly, so hopefully we'll be out of this.
All right, Joseph Bruno, running the New York City Office of Emergency Management, and thank you for your information, and stay safe there. All right, Jim Cantore, we'll be back to you as we continue our continuing coverage here.
Sandy has made landfall about 5 miles southwest of Atlantic City, and here are some of the images from this storm coming in from a little Silver Point, New Jersey.
Rising water from the ocean clearly coming into neighborhoods and creating a lot of damage across a good part of New Jersey. This, of course, little Silver Point. And yes, we have had a landfall now as the center of the storm moved across parts of New Jersey. But very important to point out, here's this specific landfall point near Atlantic City at 8 o'clock Eastern time with winds of about 80 miles per hour. This is not like your typical storm, so the worst is far from over. Sandy is huge. The extreme weather is going to continue. What was a hurricane got wrapped up into more of a nor'easter. So now we are dealing with Superstorm Sandy, just as we anticipated. The heavy rain moving inland, strong winds still coming ashore, damaging, dangerous winds, and that means we are far from over when it comes to the storm surge and water rise.
That's right, and we want to check in right now with Al Roker, who's in Point Pleasant Beach, where Sandy is battering the New Jersey coast.
Well, it's been an all-day battle between Mother Nature in the form of Hurricane Sandy and a man-made dune that had been built after a nor'easter in December of 1992. The town put it there to try to keep the ocean away, and until then, it has pretty much held. But now with Hurricane Sandy,